There are moments in life when a single glance changes everything. For Dante Bellomo, that moment happened on a Tuesday night in October 2015, inside a tired diner in Providence, Rhode Island. He saw something he wasn't supposed to see. A bruise. Dark purple. Fresh. Angry. And the woman trying to hide it had no idea that noticing her pain would set off a chain of events that would shock an entire community. But here's what you need to understand first. Dante wasn't some random customer. He was a ghost. A man who built an empire in the shadows while the world looked the other way. The FBI called him Il Fantasma because despite running one of the tightest operations in the Northeast, they couldn't touch him. No clean photos, no wiretaps, no witnesses willing to talk. He was 45 years old and he'd spent his entire adult life perfecting one skill: control. Control over his organization, his territory, his emotions. He controlled everything except what he was about to feel when he saw her. The Old Mill Diner sat near Brown University, one of those 24-hour places where college kids nursed hangovers and shift workers grabbed coffee at 3 a.m. Dante owned it, though nobody knew that except his lieutenant Frank Moretti and his advisor Sal Conti. On paper, it belonged to some holding company buried under 6 layers of corporate paperwork. In reality, it was a foothold, a way to move money quietly while keeping the operation looking legitimate. Dante made these trips once a month. No security, no fanfare, just a rental car and a back booth where he could watch how things ran. Most bosses liked the spotlight, the expensive restaurants, the respect that came with fear. Not Dante. He believed visible wealth made you weak. It made you a target. So he drove a Honda Accord and wore jeans and a plain jacket, and nobody in that diner had any clue who he really was. Except maybe her, Elena Rossi. Everyone called her Ellie. 23 years old, working doubles most nights, moving between tables with the kind of efficiency that comes from pure exhaustion. Dante noticed her the way he noticed everything. Carefully, methodically, looking for the details other people missed. She was polite but not chatty, fast but not rushed, and she had this way of making herself smaller whenever the kitchen door swung open too fast or someone walked up behind her. That's when he saw it. She was restocking the sugar packets at the table next to his booth, reaching up to the high shelf. Her sleeve rode up just a few inches. And there it was. A bruise wrapped around her forearm, the kind that comes from someone grabbing too hard, twisting too rough. Purple fading into yellow at the edges. Maybe 3, 4 days old. Dante's coffee went cold in his hand. His mind went somewhere else entirely. Not to sympathy, not yet. To calculation. To the rule he'd built his entire operation around. The unspoken treaty. Never let violence spill into the civilian world. Never let innocent people get caught in the crossfire. Keep the chaos contained. It was the one thing that separated him from the animals. The reckless crews who brought heat down on everyone. Someone had hurt this girl. In his territory. On his watch. The question burning in his mind wasn't who. Not yet. It was whether this connected to his operation. Whether Moretti had hired some local muscle who didn't understand the rules. Whether someone in his organization had gotten sloppy, violent, stupid. Because if they had, if someone under his umbrella had touched an innocent waitress trying to make rent, then he had a problem. A big one. Ellie finished restocking and moved to another table. Dante watched her the way a surgeon examines an x-ray, the slight limp favoring her left side, the way she kept her arms close to her body, the careful, practiced smile she gave customers that never quite reached her eyes. This wasn't new. This was someone living in fear and learning to hide it. He made his decision right there. No discussion with Moretti. No official investigation through normal channels. This was personal now. Not because he knew her, but because she represented everything his treaty was designed to protect. The people who had no part in his world. The ones just trying to survive. Before we go any further, I need to ask you something. Have you ever noticed someone suffering in silence and wondered if you should step in? What would you do if you saw those bruises? Drop your honest thoughts in the comments. I read every single one because your perspective shapes how we tell these stories. Here's the thing. If you don't hit that like button and subscribe, the algorithm buries this story, and thousands of people who need to hear what happens next will never find it. We're not asking for much, just your engagement. A like takes 1 second. Sharing this video could help someone else who connects with Ellie's struggle. Turn on post notifications so you don't miss what Dante does next, because trust me, you'll want to see this through to the end. Dante left the diner that night without finishing his coffee. He sat in his rental car for 20 minutes, engine off, watching the front entrance, watching her move through the windows under those harsh fluorescent lights, building a plan in his head, a quiet plan, a ghost's plan. By morning, he'd already called Sal Conti, not Moretti, never Moretti. Because when you don't know who to trust, you go back to the person who's never let you down. And Sal, brilliant and cold and loyal to his core, understood exactly what Dante needed without being told. Find out who hurt her, find out why, and do it without anyone knowing we're looking. The investigation had begun. Understanding Dante Bellomo means understanding one fundamental truth. He didn't inherit power, he engineered it. Most people in his world came up through family connections. Their fathers were made men, their uncles ran crews. They were born into the life with a last name that meant something. Dante had none of that. His father was a mid-level enforcer for the Genovese family across the river in New Jersey. A man who broke legs for a living and died broke at 52. The only thing his old man ever taught him was this: muscle fades, but leverage lasts forever. So Dante built his empire differently. He didn't rely on fear or reputation. He relied on structure, on systems, on making himself so deeply embedded in legitimate business that removing him would collapse half the real estate market in Essex County. By the time he turned 28, he'd done what most bosses never manage in a lifetime. He'd made himself untouchable not through violence, but through necessity. The Bellomo Syndicate controlled the Port Newark Elizabeth Marine Terminal, not through threats, but through the unions, through the logistics companies, through the construction firms that built the warehouses and the lending operations that financed the equipment. You couldn't move cargo through that port without touching something Dante owned. And the beautiful part? Most of it was completely legal. Clean money. Real businesses. The kind the FBI could investigate for years without finding anything worth prosecuting. But here's where Dante was different from every other boss trying to go legitimate. He understood that real power requires boundaries, rules, not the kind written in law books, but the kind that keep your world from eating itself alive. That's where the unspoken treaty came from. It was simple. Maintain absolute control within your territory. Keep the peace. Handle problems internally. And never, under any circumstances, let the violence touch people who aren't part of the game. No civilians. No collateral damage. No random innocents getting caught because someone in your crew got sloppy or stupid. The moment you let that happen, you bring heat, police pressure, federal attention, media coverage, all the things that make it impossible to run the legitimate businesses that actually keep you in power. Dante's crew knew the treaty wasn't a suggestion. It was law. Break it, and you were done. Not just fired. Done. Gone. Erased. Because Dante understood something most bosses didn't. The only way to operate in the modern world was to be invisible. And you can't stay invisible when bodies start showing up in places they shouldn't. For years it worked perfectly. His operation ran smooth, quiet, profitable. The FBI knew his name but couldn't prove anything. Local cops left him alone because crime actually went down in areas he controlled. He was a stabilizing force, as strange as that sounds. The devil, you know, keeping worse devils in check. Then Angelo Rizzoli shattered everything. Rizzoli was ambitious, young, hungry. He ran a small crew under the syndicate's umbrella, handling collections in Newark's ironbound district. Good earner, decent reputation, but he had that dangerous combination of ego and impatience that gets people killed. When a local family-owned market refused to sell their lease to Continental Holdings, Rizzoli decided to send a message. He had the place torched. Middle of the night, quick job, in and out. Except the family lived upstairs, and the fire spread faster than anyone expected. 6-year-old boy died in his bedroom, trapped by smoke before firefighters could reach him. The city exploded. Media coverage, community outrage. Suddenly, the quiet market fire became a murder investigation. Federal prosecutors got involved, and Dante's carefully constructed invisibility was at risk because one idiot couldn't follow the most basic rule of the treaty. Dante's response was immediate and absolute. Within 72 hours, Rizzoli and his 4 top guys vanished, not killed in some public spectacle, just gone. Disappeared so completely that even their own families assumed they'd fled the country. The cleanup was so thorough that local police filed it as missing persons, not homicides. No evidence, no witnesses, no trail. But the damage was done. Dante's reputation for quiet control was now stained with a very public, very bloody incident. The FBI intensified their scrutiny. Local politicians who'd looked the other way suddenly needed to appear tough on crime. Every business Dante owned faced new audits, new investigations, new problems. That's why he expanded to Providence. New territory, clean slate, a place where he could rebuild the way things were supposed to work. A place where the unspoken treaty could be enforced from day one, before anyone got stupid ideas about shortcuts or violence. Providence was supposed to be perfect, quiet, controlled, a model of how his operation should function. And then he saw that bruise on Ellie Rossi's arm. Here's what most people don't understand about men like Dante. They think the violence is the point, that guys like him enjoy the brutality, the fear, the power that comes from making people hurt. They're wrong. Dante hated violence, not for moral reasons but for practical ones. Violence was messy, it was expensive, it attracted attention. It created problems that took months or years to clean up. But when violence was necessary, when someone broke the rules or threatened what he'd built, Dante didn't hesitate. He was strategic in everything except loyalty. Cross him, betray the treaty, put his operation at risk, and he became something else entirely. Something cold and absolute and final. That's the man who saw Ellie's bruise. That's the man who decided, in that moment, that whoever put it there had made a fatal mistake. Not because he was some hero trying to save an innocent girl, but because that bruise represented everything he'd spent years trying to prevent. Violence spilling into the civilian world, in his territory, under his watch. It was personal and business at the same time. The most dangerous combination. And whoever was responsible had no idea the storm that was coming. Sal Conti got the call at 2 a.m. That's how Dante operated when something mattered. No waiting for business hours. No scheduling meetings. Just a direct line and a simple instruction. I need information on someone. Quietly. Quickly. No mistakes. Sal had been with Dante for 15 years. He understood the tone. This wasn't about money or territory or some business dispute. This was something else. Something that required the kind of digging that left no footprints. The waitress at the old mill, Dante said. Elena Rossi. I need to know everything. Family situation, financial problems, who she talks to, where she lives. And I need to know if anyone in our operation has any connection to her whatsoever. Sal didn't ask why. That wasn't how their relationship worked. Dante gave orders. Sal executed them with the precision of a surgeon. Questions came later, if ever. By sunrise, the machine was already moving. Sal's intelligence network wasn't like anything you'd see in movies. No guys in dark alleys asking questions. No bribes to cops or city officials. That's the old way. Sloppy, traceable. Sal worked differently. He used databases, public records, credit reports, social media accounts, financial transactions. The kind of information people gave away freely every single day, without realizing it built a complete map of their lives. Within 12 hours, the first pieces started coming together. Elena Maria Rossi, 23 years old, born and raised in Providence. Lived in a small rental house near Roger Williams Park Zoo, a working-class neighborhood where most people knew their neighbors and everybody struggled to make rent. She'd graduated high school with decent grades, but never went to college. Not because she wasn't smart, because she couldn't afford it. 2 years ago, she'd enrolled in night classes at the community college. Business administration. She was trying to build something better for herself, one class at a time, paying out of pocket because she didn't qualify for financial aid. The records showed she'd been making steady progress until 8 months ago. Then she stopped. Just dropped out midway through the semester with no explanation. That's when Sal started looking deeper. The medical bills appeared first. Rhode Island Hospital. Emergency admission dated February 2015. Patient name, Carlo Rossi. Age 61. Elena's father. The records told a story that thousands of American families knew too well. Carlo had been a maintenance worker at a textile factory until a stroke put him in the hospital for 3 weeks. Major surgery, intensive care, physical therapy, the kind of medical emergency that destroys a family's finances even with insurance. And Carlo's insurance was the bare minimum. High deductible, limited coverage. The bills piled up fast. $78,000 in total medical debt, for a man who'd never made more than $35,000 a year in his life. That's when the loan appeared. It showed up in Carlo's bank records 3 months after the hospital discharge. A deposit of $55,000. No bank name, no loan documentation. Just a wire transfer from an account Sal couldn't immediately trace. The kind of transaction that screamed illegal lending. High interest. dangerous terms, the sort of deal desperate people make when legitimate banks won't help them. And then came the payments, every 2 weeks like clockwork. $500 withdrawn from Carlo's account. Except, Carlo wasn't working anymore. He was home recovering, unable to walk without assistance, unable to return to his job, which meant someone else was making those payments. Sal pulled Elena's work records from the old mill. The pattern was obvious once you knew to look for it. She'd been working regular shifts before her father's stroke, 30 maybe 35 hours a week, enough to pay her bills and save a little for school. After the stroke, she was working 70, sometimes 80 hours a week, double shifts at the old mill, weekend overnight shifts, every single hour she could grab. She'd stopped going to classes because she was too exhausted. She'd stopped having any kind of life because every dollar went to keeping her father alive and paying back a loan that should never have existed. But here's where things got complicated. About 6 weeks ago, the payments stopped, just suddenly ended. No more regular withdrawals from Carlo's account, no more wire transfers, nothing. Sal cross-referenced the dates. That's when Elena's bruises probably started. The next layer took longer to find. Sal had to go through neighborhood records, local business licenses, police reports that never resulted in arrests. He was looking for loan sharks operating in the Roger Williams Park area, street-level guys who preyed on people with nowhere else to turn. 3 names came up. Small-time operators running gambling rings or unofficial lending operations out of local businesses. The kind of guys who stayed just below law enforcement's radar because they were smart enough to keep things quiet. But which one had Carlo tangled up with? And more importantly, which one had decided that putting hands on a 23-year-old girl was an acceptable way to collect debt? Sal sent the information to Dante in pieces. Each new detail painted a clearer picture of what was happening. A desperate father making a terrible choice. A daughter sacrificing everything to fix it. And somewhere in that neighborhood, some piece of trash who thought intimidation and violence were acceptable business practices. Dante read through every report in his apartment, alone. The city lights of Providence casting long shadows across his walls. His anger was quiet, controlled, the most dangerous kind. This wasn't about business anymore. This wasn't even about the unspoken treaty, though that was certainly part of it. This was about a girl working herself to exhaustion trying to save her father, only to have some coward hurt her when the money ran out. Dante had seen a lot of terrible things in his life. He'd done terrible things when necessary. But this? A working-class kid getting brutalized over medical debt her father couldn't control? That crossed a line he didn't even know he had until right now. Sal's final report came through at 11 that night. The investigation had narrowed down to a specific 4-block radius near the zoo. 3 possible suspects. All of them operating in that exact area. All of them known for aggressive collection tactics. But they still didn't have a name. Not yet. Not with absolute certainty. "Give me 48 hours," Sal said over the phone. "I'll have him." Dante sat in the dark, staring at Elena's photo from her community college ID. Young. Hopeful. The kind of person his entire operation was designed to protect. Someone had hurt her. Soon he'd know exactly who. And then the real work would begin. Sal delivered the name 36 hours later, not 48. When Sal said he'd find someone, he meant it. Victor DeLuca. Street name, Vic. 34 years old. Small-time operator who'd been running a backroom card game and an unofficial lending operation out of a shuttered social club near the zoo for the past 6 years. The kind of guy who thought he was smarter than he actually was. Dangerous enough to hurt people, not smart enough to avoid leaving a trail. The file Sal put together was thorough. Vic's father had been connected to a defunct Providence crew back in the 80s, which gave Vic just enough credibility to operate without getting immediately shut down. He wasn't made. Wasn't affiliated with any real organization. Just a street thug using his father's old name to run his own petty empire. Illegal gambling, high-interest loans, protection rackets targeting small businesses that couldn't afford to say no. Carlo Rossi had walked into Vic's social club 8 months ago, desperate and out of options. Every legitimate bank had turned him down. His credit was destroyed. The medical bills were crushing him. Vic saw an easy mark. Lent him $55,000 at 15% interest per week. The kind of terms that make it mathematically impossible to ever pay off the principal. Carlo tried. For 5 months, Elena worked herself sick making those payments. $500 every 2 weeks. It wasn't even covering the interest, but Vic accepted it because the money kept flowing. As long as Carlo was paying, Vic didn't care that the debt was actually growing. Then Carlo's condition worsened. Another hospitalization, more bills. The payments stopped. Vic's response was predictable for someone like him. He showed up at Carlo's house on a Thursday afternoon. Carlo was alone, still recovering, barely able to stand without assistance. Vic made threats, talked about what happens to people who don't pay their debts, told Carlo he had 1 week to come up with $3,000, or things would get ugly. Carlo didn't have $3,000. He didn't have 300. He had nothing. Elena came home that evening to find her father shaking, terrified, trying to figure out how to fix an unfixable problem. She'd heard about men like Vic. Everyone in the neighborhood had. But hearing about them and having one threaten your father in your own home were very different things. She went to see Vic herself 2 days later. Walked into his social club during afternoon hours when the card games were quiet. Told him she'd make the payments. Told him to leave her father alone. Promised she'd figure something out if he just gave her time. Vic's response was to laugh. Then he grabbed her arm, twisted it hard enough to leave marks. Told her he didn't negotiate with waitresses. Told her that if she came back without money, next time would be worse. Then he shoved her toward the door hard enough that she stumbled into a table on her way out. That was the bruise Dante saw, the one that started everything. Sal had confirmed it through 3 separate sources. People in the neighborhood who'd seen Elena leave the social club that day, a bartender who worked part-time for Vic and didn't like what he'd witnessed. Even surveillance footage from a bodega across the street that caught Elena walking away, holding her arm, trying not to cry. Dante read the file twice. Then he sat in silence for 20 minutes. Most people in his position would have handled this simply. Send a couple of guys to remind Vic that certain people are off limits, maybe break a few of his bones. Make it clear that operating in Providence came with rules. Quick, efficient, effective. But Dante couldn't do that. Not without becoming exactly what he'd spent years fighting against. Violence against a civilian, even a piece of garbage like Vic, still counted as breaking the unspoken treaty. It would bring attention, police reports, potential witnesses, the kind of heat that compromised everything he'd built in Providence. He called Sal at midnight. "I need you to set up a meeting. Vic DeLuca. Tell him we're interested in bringing him into a larger operation. Make it sound legitimate. Tell him there's real money involved if he's smart enough to handle it." Sal understood immediately. "Where?" "The Wanskook site. The construction project on the north end. Wednesday afternoon. Make sure he comes alone. And then we solve this problem without throwing a single punch." What Dante had in mind was unprecedented. It required resources most people didn't have access to. It required connections that took years to build. And it required a level of precision that left absolutely no room for error. Over the next 48 hours, Dante and Sal constructed something remarkable. Not a plan for violence. A plan for complete and total destruction using the one weapon Vic would never see coming: the law itself. They compiled every illegal transaction Vic had made in the past 3 years. Every loan with criminal interest rates. Every gambling operation. Every protection payment from local businesses. Then they documented it all. Ledgers, recorded conversations, financial records that showed exactly where the money went and who it came from. But documentation wasn't enough. They needed it to appear legitimate. They needed it to look like a proper law enforcement investigation, not something manufactured by a rival crew. That's where Sal's connections came in. People who owed favors. People who understood that sometimes the system could be guided toward the right target. People who knew how to make evidence appear through official channels without anyone asking uncomfortable questions about where it originated. Vic had no idea what was waiting for him. He thought he was meeting about an opportunity, a chance to get connected with real players instead of running his small-time operation. Instead, he was about to learn what happens when you put your hands on someone Dante Bellomo decided to protect. Wednesday couldn't come fast enough. Vic DeLuca showed up to the Wanskook construction site 15 minutes early. That told Dante everything he needed to know. The man was eager, hungry, probably already spending the money he thought he was about to make. The site was legitimate. Continental Holdings was building a mixed-use development, apartments and retail space. During the day it was full of workers and inspectors, and the normal chaos of construction. But Wednesday at 4 in the afternoon, the crews had gone home. Just empty equipment and half-finished buildings and the kind of privacy you can't buy in a public space. Dante waited in the site office, a temporary trailer with blueprints on the walls and concrete dust on everything. He watched through the window as Vic pulled up in a 10-year-old Cadillac, trying to look more successful than he was. When Vic walked into that trailer, Dante was sitting behind the desk like he owned it. Because he did. "Mr. DeLuca, thanks for coming." Vic tried to read the room, Tried to figure out who this guy was and why the meeting felt wrong already. Dante let him sweat for a moment. Let the silence do the work. I hear you run a decent operation near the park, Dante said finally. Lending, cards, protection services. Vic relaxed slightly. This was familiar territory. Yeah, I do all right. Been running things there for 6 years. Good relationships with the local businesses. No problems. No problems, Dante repeated. He let those words hang in the air. That's interesting. Because I heard you put your hands on a girl last week, 23 years old, Waitress. Her only crime was asking you to give her father more time to pay. The blood drained from Vic's face. Now here's the thing, Dante continued, his voice perfectly calm. I don't care about your little operation. I don't care about your card games or your loans or your protection racket. That's small-time garbage that doesn't affect me at all. But when you touch an innocent civilian, when you hurt someone who's not part of this world, you become a problem. And I solve problems. Vic started to speak. Dante raised one hand. I'm not done. You're going to walk out of here today. You're going to go home. And you're going to pray that what happens next goes easier than you deserve. Because I could make this very simple and very painful. But I'm not going to do that. I'm going to do something much worse. I'm going to let the system handle you. Vic didn't understand. That was obvious. He thought he was being threatened with violence. He had no idea what was actually coming. Get out, Dante said. And don't ever let me hear your name again. Vic left confused. Probably thought he'd gotten off easy. Probably went home thinking he'd dodged something dangerous but survived. He had 12 hours of freedom left. That night, while Vic slept in his apartment above the social club, Sal Conti's operation moved into position. Not muscle, not enforcers, professionals. The kind of people who knew how to make things look exactly right. The evidence had been building for weeks. Every illegal transaction Vic had ever made. Every loan. Every payment. But it wasn't just raw data. Sal's team had turned it into something beautiful. Official-looking ledgers. Recorded conversations that appeared to come from legitimate surveillance. Financial documents that traced the money through multiple accounts. Witness statements from people Vic had threatened. Testimony from business owners he'd extorted. And all of it was packaged exactly the way a real law enforcement investigation would package it, complete with case numbers and official forms, and the kind of bureaucratic paperwork that made it impossible to question. At 4:30 in the morning, 3 Rhode Island State Police cruisers pulled up outside Vic's social club, 6 officers, search warrant, arrest warrant, federal racketeering charges that carried 20 years minimum. They found everything. The ledgers in his safe, the cash hidden in the back room, the records of every illegal loan he'd made. Evidence so overwhelming that even Vic's lawyer would eventually tell him to take a plea deal. Vic never had a chance to ask how it happened. He was in handcuffs and read his rights before he fully woke up. By 6 in the morning, he was in federal custody. By noon, he was being transported to a facility in Pennsylvania, far away from anyone who might ask uncomfortable questions about how the investigation came together so perfectly. The neighborhood woke up to chaos. Police tape. News cameras, officers carrying boxes of evidence out of the social club. People who'd been too scared to talk about Vic suddenly felt brave enough to tell reporters what they knew. Stories about intimidation and violence and fear. By evening, the local news was calling it a major victory against organized crime. The Providence Journal ran a headline about a surprise tactical operation that dismantled an illegal gambling and loan shark operation. They credited an anonymous tip that led to months of investigation. Except there hadn't been months of investigation. There'd been 72 hours of carefully constructed fiction made real by people who knew exactly how to work the system. Nobody questioned it. Why would they? The evidence was perfect. The arrest was clean. Vic was guilty of everything they charged him with. The fact that law enforcement had help they didn't know about didn't change the truth of what he'd done. The community reacted with something close to joy. People who'd been paying protection money suddenly didn't have to. Business owners who'd been threatened could breathe again. And Carlo Rossi, still recovering at home, heard the news and wept with relief he didn't completely understand. His daughter heard it too. Ellie was starting her shift at the old mill when someone mentioned it. The man who'd hurt her, the man who'd made her father sick with worry, gone, arrested, facing decades in prison. She didn't understand how it happened. Nobody did. It felt like a miracle, like something impossible had occurred overnight. In the back booth of the old mill, Dante Bellomo drank his coffee and watched her face. Watched the moment she realized she was safe, that her father was safe, that the nightmare was over. He'd done this. Not with violence, not with intimidation. with resources and connections and a willingness to bend the system toward justice when the system wouldn't get there on its own. The evidence was fabricated. The investigation was manufactured. But Vic's crimes were real, and now he'd pay for them in ways that were completely legal and utterly permanent. Nobody would ever know the truth. Not the police, not the prosecutors, not even Ellie. That was fine with Dante. Ghosts don't need credit. They just need results. December came cold to Providence. The kind of cold that seeps into old houses and makes every morning a struggle to get out of bed. For Elena Rossi, winter meant higher heating bills and longer shifts, and the constant calculation of whether she could afford both groceries and electricity. 2 months had passed since Vic's arrest. 2 months of breathing easier. 2 months of her father actually sleeping through the night instead of waking up, terrified that someone would come pounding on the door. The debt was still there, massive and growing, but at least the immediate threat was gone. Ellie had started picking up extra holiday shifts at the diner. Christmas season meant better tips, and she needed every dollar. She'd done the math 100 times. At her current pace, paying what she could afford each month, she'd have that loan paid off sometime around her 40th birthday. Maybe. If nothing else went wrong. If her father stayed healthy. If she never had an emergency of her own. It was a Tuesday morning when the letter arrived. Certified mail. Carlo signed for it, confused because nobody sent him certified mail except bill collectors and lawyers. His hands shook as he opened the envelope. The letterhead belonged to a law firm in Boston, prestigious. The kind of firm that didn't handle small-time debt cases. Carlo read the first paragraph 3 times before his brain accepted what his eyes were seeing. The Silent Benevolence Fund. That's what they called themselves. A private charitable organization dedicated to helping families facing insurmountable medical debt. They'd reviewed Carlo's case. They'd decided to intervene. Effective immediately, his entire outstanding loan balance was paid in full. $55,000. Gone. Erased. Every penny of interest, every late fee, all of it. The letter included an official payment confirmation, documentation showing the debt holder had been compensated, legal paperwork declaring Carlo free and clear of all financial obligations related to the loan. There was only one condition, stated clearly in bold text at the bottom of the page. He could never attempt to identify the source of the funds. He could never try to contact the Silent Benevolence Fund. He could never seek out whoever had done this. Complete anonymity was non-negotiable. Carlo sat at his kitchen table and cried. Deep, shaking sobs that came from somewhere he didn't know existed. 2 years of crushing weight. 2 years of watching his daughter work herself to exhaustion because of his medical emergency. 2 years of guilt and fear and hopelessness. Gone in a single letter. Ellie came home from her morning shift to find him still sitting there. The letter clutched in his hands, tears streaming down his face. For a terrifying moment she thought something horrible had happened. Then he handed her the paper. She read it twice, then 3 times. Then she sat down next to her father and they both cried together, holding each other in their small kitchen while winter light filtered through old curtains. $55,000. An impossible amount of money to people who counted pennies. Just gone. Paid by someone who didn't want thanks or recognition or anything except their privacy. The neighborhood found out within days. Carlo told his friend at the corner market. Ellie mentioned it to a coworker. Word spread the way it always does in tight communities. And immediately, people started connecting dots. First Vic gets arrested in some kind of perfect federal operation. Then the Rossi family, Vic's most desperate victims, suddenly get their debt erased by a mysterious fund nobody's ever heard of. Coincidence? In a neighborhood where coincidences were rare and usually meant someone was paying attention, people whispered about guardian angels. About someone powerful who decided the Rossi family deserved a break. The romantic ones called it a Christmas miracle. The cynical ones wondered what the catch was. The smart ones kept their theories quiet and felt grateful someone was looking out for the neighborhood. Ellie tried to respect the condition. She really did. But every part of her wanted to know who'd done this. Who'd cared enough about a waitress and her sick father to spend that kind of money? Who had the resources and the will to make something impossible happen? She found herself looking at customers differently, wondering if one of them was responsible, if someone had been watching, if the answer was closer than she realized. Dante watched her from his usual booth, 3 weeks after the letter arrived. He saw the change in her, the way her shoulders didn't carry quite so much weight, the way her smile reached her eyes now, the way she moved through the diner like someone who could finally breathe. He felt something unfamiliar in his chest. Not pride exactly, not satisfaction in the usual sense. Something warmer, something that made him understand why people did irrational things for strangers. Why mercy sometimes mattered more than strategy. He'd spent $55,000 of his own money, clean money, from legitimate accounts that couldn't be traced back to him. He'd done it without hesitation, without expecting anything in return. Stop for a second. $50,000, gone, just like that. Now ask yourself this. If someone saved your family from financial ruin, completely anonymously, would you try to find them? Or would you respect their wish to stay hidden? Comment below. I'm genuinely curious what you'd do. Here's where I need your help. We're halfway through this story, and if you haven't liked this video yet, please do it now. Not for us, but because the algorithm decides who sees this based on your engagement in the first hour. Right now, hundreds of people who would love this story are scrolling past it because the numbers aren't high enough. We pour everything into these stories. Research, writing, production, and all we ask is that you take 2 seconds to like, share, and comment. If you're feeling what Ellie's feeling right now, if Dante's choice resonates with you, let us know. Turn on those post notifications, because what happens next will completely change everything you think you know about this man. We read every comment to understand what you want to see more of, so talk to us. Now, let's see how this act of kindness changes both their lives. Dante started coming to Providence twice a week, then 3 times. By mid-January, he was there almost every other day, and it had nothing to do with business. He told himself he was checking on the operation, making sure Moretti was running things correctly, keeping an eye on the territory after the Vic situation. All legitimate reasons for a boss to maintain presence in a satellite location. But he knew the truth. He was coming back to see her. It started small. He'd time his visits to coincide with her shifts. He'd sit in the same back booth where he could watch the whole diner while staying out of the main flow of traffic. He'd order coffee and maybe a sandwich, and he'd watch Elena Rossi work. She was different now. The weight she'd been carrying was lighter. She smiled at customers and meant it. She moved with energy instead of exhaustion. She'd even started talking to the other servers during quiet moments, laughing at jokes, being young in a way she probably hadn't been able to afford before. One Thursday evening, the diner was unusually slow. Winter storm warnings had kept most people home. Ellie was working with just one other server and a skeleton kitchen crew. Dante sat in his booth nursing his 3rd coffee, when she approached with the pot for a refill. "You're here a lot," she said. Direct, not flirting, just observing. Dante looked up. First time she'd initiated conversation beyond taking his order. "Good coffee." She glanced at his still full cup and smiled. "Right. Our coffee is definitely what keeps people coming back. Maybe I like the atmosphere." At a dinner near a college campus, the atmosphere is usually drunk students and scrambled eggs. He found himself smiling despite his better judgment. Fair point. Maybe I'm here for the service. She studied him for a moment, really looked at him. Most people didn't. Most people saw what they expected to see and moved on. But Ellie had survived something hard, and that changed how you looked at the world. Made you more careful, more observant. "You're not from around here," she said. "What makes you say that? You don't talk like Providence, and you don't act like the other regulars. They come in, eat fast, leave. You sit for hours, watch people, like you're studying something. Smart." That was the first thing that struck him. She paid attention, noticed patterns, drew conclusions. "I work in real estate," Dante said, which was technically true. "Development projects. I'm in town on business." "For 2 months? Big project." She nodded slowly. Didn't quite believe him, but wasn't going to push. "Must be important." "It is." She refilled his coffee even though it didn't need it. Gave him an excuse to stay. "Well, let me know if you need anything else. We've got fresh pie if you're interested." Over the next 3 weeks, those brief conversations became routine. Nothing deep, nothing personal. Just the kind of small talk that happens between a regular customer and a server who's good at her job. But underneath it, something else was building. Dante learned things about her without asking direct questions. She was taking online classes now that her schedule had freed up. Business administration, like Sal's research had shown. She wanted to run her own place someday. Nothing fancy. Maybe a small cafe or a bookstore. Somewhere that felt like community, instead of just commerce. She talked about her father's recovery, how he was starting physical therapy, how he smiled more now, how he'd even started talking about maybe going back to work part-time. She never mentioned the debt, never brought up Vic or the letter or the miracle that had changed their lives. But Dante could see the gratitude in everything she did. The way she treated every customer with genuine care. The way she appreciated the small things. He noticed she never complained. Not about the long hours. Not about difficult customers. Not about the hand life had dealt her. She just kept moving forward, finding reasons to be grateful instead of bitter. That's what got to him. Not her looks, though she was pretty in that natural way that didn't need makeup or fancy clothes. Not sympathy for her situation, though he'd certainly felt that. It was her strength, her refusal to be a victim, her ability to face terrible circumstances and come out the other side still believing the world could be good. Ellie noticed changes in him too. The way he always asked how her day was and actually listened to the answer. The way he left $20 tips on $8 checks. The way he made sure to come in during her shifts specifically, like he was checking on her without being obvious about it. One evening in early February, she brought his bill and he left 3 20s on the table. The meal had cost $12. She came back immediately. This is too much. Keep it. I can't accept this. It's not right. Consider it appreciation for good service. Nobody tips $48 on a sandwich and coffee. What's this really about? Dante met her eyes, held her gaze for longer than was comfortable. Maybe I think you deserve it. Something shifted in that moment. A line crossed that neither of them had meant to approach. Ellie felt it. The weight of attention from someone who saw her as more than just a waitress. Someone whose interest carried implications she didn't fully understand, but instinctively recognized as dangerous. Dante felt it too. The realization that he wasn't just protecting a civilian anymore. He was attracted to her. Genuinely, deeply attracted in a way that complicated everything about who he was and what he did. The power imbalance was obvious. He was a man with resources she couldn't imagine. He'd already intervened in her life in ways she'd never know. He was 45. She was 23. He ran a criminal organization. She served coffee and dreamed of owning a bookstore. Nothing about this made sense. Nothing about this was safe. For either of them. She pushed the extra money back across the table. I appreciate the thought. But I earn my tips. I don't accept charity. Pride. Another thing he admired about her. He took the money back, left a normal tip. Fair enough. As he walked out into the February cold, Dante understood something he'd been avoiding. This wasn't going away. Whatever this was, it had moved beyond professional interest, beyond protecting a civilian, beyond upholding his code. He was falling for someone he had no right to want, and judging by the way she'd looked at him, the confusion and curiosity in her eyes, she was starting to feel something too. The smart move was to stop coming, to let Moretti handle Providence, to walk away before this became something neither of them could control. But Dante Bellomo had built his entire life on control, and for the first time in decades, he wasn't sure he wanted to. Sal Conti noticed it first. A discrepancy in the Providence numbers. Nothing major. Just a small inconsistency in the quarterly report Moretti submitted. Revenue from the Old Mill Diner was up, which made sense. But the operating costs were also up in a way that didn't track with normal business expenses. He brought it to Dante's attention on a Wednesday morning. They were in Dante's Newark office, going through the routine financial reviews that kept the legitimate side of the business running smoothly. Look at this, Sal said, pointing to a spreadsheet. Moretti's showing increased food costs at the diner, but I checked with the suppliers. Their prices haven't changed. So, where's this extra money going? Dante studied the numbers. The difference was less than $4,000 over 3 months. Pocket change in the grand scheme of their operation. The kind of thing most bosses would ignore. But Dante hadn't stayed untouchable by ignoring small problems. Small problems became big problems if you gave them time to grow. Pull the last 6 months of reports, Dante said. I want to see if there's a pattern. Over the next 2 days, Sal dug deeper. The inconsistencies were subtle. A few hundred here, 1,000 there, always buried in legitimate-looking expenses. Supply orders that were slightly inflated. Maintenance costs that didn't match actual work performed. Payroll that included employees who didn't seem to exist when Sal tried to verify them. Someone was skimming. Not aggressively, not enough to raise immediate red flags, but consistently, carefully, like they knew exactly how much they could take without triggering an audit. The natural suspect was Moretti. He managed the Providence operation. He had access to the accounts. He submitted the reports. But something about it didn't sit right with Dante. Moretti was a good earner. Loyal for years. Why would he risk everything for small-time theft? Maybe he's got a gambling problem, Sal suggested. Or a drug habit. Something he's trying to hide. Then why be so careful about it? If you're desperate, you take bigger risks. This feels calculated. Like whoever's doing it isn't stealing out of need. They're stealing with purpose. You think someone's setting Moretti up? Dante didn't answer. He didn't know yet. His instincts were telling him something was wrong, but he couldn't see the full picture. Not yet. While the business concerns simmered in the background, Dante found himself spending more time at the old mill, telling himself he was investigating, watching for signs of problems, looking for evidence of who might be manipulating the books, but mostly he was watching Ellie. Their conversations grew longer, more personal. She'd started sitting in his booth during slow periods, taking her break while he nursed coffee that had long gone cold. She talked about her online classes, about the essay she was writing on small business management, about her dream of one day opening something of her own. Nothing big, she said one evening. Just somewhere people feel welcome, where the coffee's good and the atmosphere matters more than profit margins. Profit margins matter, Dante said. Can't stay open if you're losing money. I know, but they're not the only thing that matters. My dad used to say that a business that forgets its community is just a machine counting dollars. No soul, no purpose except more money. Your dad sounds wise. She smiled, a real smile that made something in Dante's chest tighten. He is. He's doing better, by the way. The therapy is helping. He can walk without the cane now. Even talking about maybe finding part-time work. That's good. I'm glad he's recovering. Me too. I keep thinking about how close we came to losing everything. Then somehow it all just worked out. Like someone was watching out for us. Dante said nothing. Just let her talk. Let her believe in miracles instead of manipulation. She studied him across the table. You know what's weird? I feel like I can talk to you. Like really talk. Most customers just want their food and to be left alone. But you actually listen. Maybe I'm just a good listener. Or maybe you're lonely. The observation caught him off guard. What makes you say that? You're always alone. Always in that booth. Nice suit. Expensive watch. Clearly successful. But you're sitting in a diner by yourself at 9 on a Thursday night. That's not someone with a full life waiting for them. She was too perceptive. Saw too much. It should have made him nervous. Instead, it made him want to tell her things he'd never told anyone. Maybe I prefer my own company, he said. Maybe. Or maybe you're just used to it. The conversation shifted to safer topics. Her classes, the weather, small things that didn't require vulnerability. But something had been acknowledged between them, a recognition that they were both, in different ways, alone. 3 days later, Dante was leaving the diner around 11 at night. Ellie's shift ended at the same time. He watched her exit through the side door, pulling her coat tight against the March cold. She was walking home, 2 miles through Providence neighborhoods that were safe enough during the day but questionable after dark. She'd done it hundreds of times. Part of her routine. Dante followed, kept his distance, made sure she didn't notice, watched her navigate empty streets and dark corners until she reached her house near the park. He did it again 2 nights later, then again the following week. Not because she'd asked, not because she knew, but because he couldn't stand the thought of something happening to her while he had the power to prevent it. It was crossing a line. He knew that. This wasn't protecting a civilian anymore. This was something else. Something personal that blurred every boundary he'd carefully maintained. On a Friday night in mid-March, she caught him. She'd been walking her normal route when she suddenly stopped and turned around. Caught him half a block back, trying to look casual. Are you following me? Direct. No fear. Just curiosity. Dante could have lied. Should have lied. Yes. Why? Because it's late. Because you're walking alone. Because bad things happen and I'd rather they didn't happen to you. She stared at him for a long moment. Processing. How long have you been doing this? A few weeks. That's either very protective or very creepy. I haven't decided which. Probably both. A car passed. The headlights illuminated her face. She wasn't scared. Wasn't angry. Just trying to understand something that didn't make sense. You don't even know me, she said finally. I know enough. What does that mean? He stepped closer. Close enough to see the confusion in her eyes. It means I care whether you get home safely. It means I think about you more than I should. It means I'm breaking every rule I have about keeping distance from people who aren't part of my world. And what world is that? He couldn't tell her. Wouldn't tell her. So he said nothing. She wrapped her arms around herself. Not from cold. From the weight of something neither of them wanted to name. This doesn't make sense. You're twice my age. You're obviously important, successful, connected. I'm a waitress taking online classes. Why would you care about me? Because you're extraordinary and you don't even know it. The words hung between them. Too honest. Too raw. Dante had spent decades controlling every word, every gesture, every expression. And here he was, standing on a dark street, telling a girl he barely knew that she mattered to him in ways he couldn't explain. Ellie looked at him like she was seeing him for the first time. Really seeing him. Not the customer, not the mysterious regular, the person underneath. "Walk me home," she said quietly. "If you're going to follow me anyway, you might as well do it properly." They walked the last half mile side by side, not talking, just existing in the space between what was and what couldn't be. When they reached her door, she turned to face him. "I don't know what this is, but it scares me." "Me too." "Good. At least we're both terrified." She went inside. Dante walked back to his car feeling something he hadn't felt in 20 years. Hope. And the certainty that hope was the most dangerous thing a man like him could afford. The first attack happened on a Tuesday morning in late March. Continental Holdings' entire computer network went down. Every system, every file, every database. Just blank screens and error messages. IT specialists were called in immediately. They assumed it was a server failure, maybe a power surge, something technical and fixable. 3 hours later, they realized it was something much worse. Someone had accessed their systems remotely, penetrated their security, downloaded sensitive files including financial records, client information, and internal communications. Then they'd locked everything behind encryption that would take months to crack. Sal got the call at noon. By 2 in the afternoon, he was in Newark meeting with Dante and the head of their IT security, a man named Chen who looked like he hadn't slept in days. "This isn't normal," Chen said, pulling up data on his laptop. Whoever did this knew exactly what they were looking for. They bypassed 3 layers of security like they had the passwords. Grabbed specific files. Left a calling card. "What kind of calling card?" Dante asked. Chen turned the screen. A message displayed in simple text. "You took something that wasn't yours. Now we take something from you." Dante stared at the words. This wasn't how his world operated. Traditional rivals sent messages through intermediaries. They made threats in person. They used violence or intimidation. They didn't hack computer systems and leave cryptic notes. "Can you trace where it came from?" Sal asked. "They routed it through servers in 6 different countries. Whoever did this knows what they're doing. Professional level, maybe government level." That's when Dante understood. This wasn't a rival crew. This was something new. Something he'd never faced before. Over the next week, Sal dedicated every resource to figuring out who was behind the attack. He brought in specialists. People who understood digital warfare and cybersecurity. People who moved in worlds Dante barely comprehended. The information they uncovered was disturbing. The attack had originated from a group that didn't have a name most people would recognize. No street reputation, no territorial claims. Just a network of highly connected individuals operating in complete secrecy. Former law enforcement, retired intelligence officers, tech experts, lawyers, even a few politicians. They called themselves the Partnership, not because they were partners in the traditional sense, but because they'd formed an alliance based on mutual benefit and shared resources. They didn't operate like organized crime. They operated like a corporation. Cold, efficient, focused on high-value targets that traditional criminals couldn't touch. Their specialty was digital fraud, corporate espionage, high-level money laundering using cryptocurrency and offshore accounts. They made millions moving money for people who needed it cleaned, without ever physically touching cash. And they used low-level street operations as drop points, places where dirty money could be converted to clean money through gambling losses and loan repayments. Small-time operations that looked too insignificant for law enforcement to care about. Operations, exactly like Vic DeLuca's gambling ring. When Sal made that connection, everything clicked into place. Vic hadn't been running an independent operation. He'd been a small cog in a much larger machine. The Partnership had been using his social club to launder funds. Dirty money came in through gambling losses that didn't really exist. Clean money went out through loan repayments from people who thought they were borrowing from Vic, but were actually part of a sophisticated washing system. The amounts were small enough to stay under federal reporting requirements, spread across dozens of similar operations throughout the Northeast. Individually insignificant, collectively worth millions. When Dante took down Vic, He hadn't just removed a street-level loan shark. He'd destroyed a critical node in the partnership's money laundering network. Worse, he'd sent their accountant running, the one person who knew the full scope of their operation, the man who could connect every transaction and every player. The partnership had lost money, lost infrastructure, lost security, all because Dante Bellomo had noticed a bruise on a waitress's arm and decided to do something about it. They wanted revenge. But not the kind Dante was used to. They didn't send soldiers. They didn't make threats in dark alleys. They attacked his legitimate businesses, his computer systems, his financial records. They were dismantling his empire using tools he barely understood. Sal laid it all out in Dante's office on a Friday evening. Documents, data analysis, connection maps showing how the partnership operated. "This is bad," Sal said. "These people have resources we can't match. They have access to law enforcement databases. They can manipulate financial records. They can make us look guilty of crimes we didn't commit or erase evidence of crimes we did. How did we not know about them before? Because they're smart. They stay invisible. They don't compete with traditional organized crime. They operate in spaces we don't touch. Digital, international, corporate." Dante studied the information, saw the scope of what he was facing. How many operations like VIX do they run? Best guess? 30 to 40 throughout New England alone. All small time, all beneath notice, collectively moving 10 to 15 million a year. And we destroyed one of them. We didn't just destroy it. We had their guy arrested on federal charges. We exposed their entire laundering method in that location. Every transaction Vic made is now evidence in a federal case. If prosecutors dig deep enough, they'll find connections to the partnership. Dante leaned back in his chair. Processing. So they need to eliminate two problems. They need to stop us from digging deeper, and they need to make sure we can't expose what we've already found. Exactly. That cyber attack was just a warning. They're showing us what they can do. Next time won't be a warning. Can we fight them? Sal hesitated. That hesitation told Dante everything he needed to know. Not the way we usually fight. We can't intimidate them. We can't outmuscle them. They're not afraid of us because we can't touch them the way they can touch us. For the first time in his career, Dante Bellomo faced an enemy he couldn't control through traditional means. An enemy that operated in shadows deeper than his own. An enemy that could destroy him without ever meeting him face to face. And the worst part? He'd brought this on himself. By helping Ellie. By upholding his treaty. By doing the right thing for someone who had nothing to do with his world. The irony wasn't lost on him. His one act of genuine compassion had triggered a war he might not survive. Find out everything you can about them, Dante said finally. Every member, every operation, every weakness. If they want a war, we'll give them one. Just not the kind they're expecting. Sal nodded and left. Dante sat alone in his office, staring at the connection maps, understanding that everything was about to change. Somewhere out there, the partnership was planning their next move. And Dante had no idea how to stop people he couldn't see, couldn't threaten, and couldn't predict. The game had changed. The rules were different. And for the first time in decades, Dante Bellomo wasn't sure he knew how to win. Sal spent 3 days working backward through every piece of information the partnership had about Dante's operation. Every detail they knew, every weakness they'd exploited, every move they'd anticipated. The list was damning. They knew about Continental Holdings' financial structure. They knew which accounts held clean money, and which ones were questionable. They knew Dante's schedule, his properties, his key associates, information that wasn't public, information that could only come from someone inside the organization. There was a leak. Someone feeding information to the partnership. Someone close enough to Dante to know things that only his inner circle would know. Sal started eliminating suspects. He reviewed everyone who had access to sensitive information, looked for unusual spending, new bank accounts, changes in behavior, anything that might indicate someone had been compromised or bought off. The evidence kept pointing in one direction. Frank Moretti. At first, Sal didn't want to believe it. Moretti had been with the organization for 12 years. Solid earner, reliable lieutenant. He'd managed the Providence expansion exactly as instructed. No major problems. No red flags. But when Sal dug deeper, the red flags appeared everywhere. Moretti's financial inconsistencies weren't theft. They were payments. Small amounts funneled to accounts that eventually traced back to shell companies connected to the partnership. Not enough to live on. Just enough to keep him motivated. Compensation for services rendered. The timeline was devastating. Moretti had joined the Bellomo syndicate 13 years ago, right after a previous organization he'd worked for collapsed under federal investigation. Sal had always assumed Moretti was lucky to escape that mess. Now he understood. Moretti hadn't escaped. He'd been placed, inserted into Dante's organization by the partnership to be their eyes and ears. His job was simple: keep the syndicate focused on traditional criminal activities. Drugs, loan sharking, protection rackets. The kind of crimes that left trails. The kind that kept law enforcement busy while the partnership operated in spaces nobody was watching. For 12 years, it had worked perfectly. Dante ran his operation thinking he was invisible. Meanwhile, Moretti was feeding information to people who were using it to stay one step ahead. The Vic DeLuca situation must have panicked them. Dante wasn't supposed to care about a random waitress. He wasn't supposed to investigate personally. He wasn't supposed to discover that Vic's operation was connected to something bigger. Moretti had tried to keep Dante away from Providence, kept insisting everything was under control, kept filing reports that made the operation look clean and simple. But Dante had ignored him, made his own visits, saw things Moretti didn't want him to see. And now the partnership knew their cover was blown. Sal brought the evidence to Dante on a Wednesday morning, laid it all out: bank records, communication patterns, timeline analysis. Everything pointed to the same conclusion. Moretti was the rat, had been from the beginning. Dante read through it all in silence. His face showed nothing. No anger, no surprise, just cold calculation. "Set up a meeting," he said finally. "Tonight, the warehouse in Providence. Just him and me." The warehouse sat in an industrial area near the port. Legitimate property owned by Continental Holdings. Empty at night, private. Perfect for conversations that needed to stay quiet. Dante arrived first, waited in the shadows near a stack of shipping containers. When Moretti pulled up 20 minutes later, he looked nervous. He knew something was wrong, could feel it. "You wanted to see me?" Moretti called out, his voice echoing in the empty space. Dante stepped into the light. "Tell me about the partnership." Moretti's face went pale. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Yes, you do. You've been working for them since before you joined my organization, feeding them information, keeping me focused on the wrong things while they operated right under my nose." "Dante, I swear I don't know anything about—" "Stop." Dante's voice was quiet but absolute. "I have your bank records. I have your communications. I have everything. The only question now is whether you're smart enough to be honest." The silence stretched. Moretti's shoulders sagged. The fight went out of him. "How did you find out? Does it matter?" "I suppose not." Moretti leaned against a container, looked older suddenly. Tired. "They approached me 13 years ago. After the Carbone family went down, I was facing charges. Looking at 20 years. They made it all disappear. New identity. Clean record. All I had to do was get close to you. Watch. Report. Make sure you stayed visible while they stayed invisible. And you agreed. What choice did I have? Prison or freedom? It wasn't hard math. You could have said no. Said no to people who can erase federal charges? Who have connections inside law enforcement? You don't say no to them. You cooperate or you disappear." Dante walked closer. "How much did they pay you?" $5,000 a month, plus bonuses when I delivered something useful. $60,000 a year to betray everything I built. I never gave them anything that would destroy you. Just enough to keep them satisfied. Just enough to keep both sides happy. Except you gave them everything they needed to attack me when I disrupted their operation." Moretti looked confused. "What operation?" "Vic DeLuca. The loan shark who was hurting civilians in my territory. He was one of their money laundering drops. When I took him down, I exposed their entire system." Understanding dawned on Moretti's face. "The waitress. That's what this is about. You were never supposed to notice her." There it was. Confirmation of everything Sal had pieced together. "You were supposed to handle that situation," Moretti continued. "Keep it contained. Make sure Dante Bellomo didn't get personally involved in street-level problems. But you went there yourself, saw her, started digging. I tried to steer you away, kept telling you Providence was fine, but you wouldn't listen. Because a girl was being hurt in my territory. Because someone violated the treaty." "The treaty?" Moretti laughed bitterly. "You and your rules. You think they make you better than everyone else, but they just make you predictable. The partnership knew exactly how you'd react once you found out about the girl. They knew you'd investigate. They knew you'd help her. They were counting on it. Why? Because it would expose you, force you to use your resources, show them how your operation really works. They wanted you to save her, wanted you to reveal your methods. Now they know everything about how you move, how you think, what matters to you. Dante absorbed that, understanding the full scope of the manipulation. They used her as bait. They used your conscience against you, and it worked perfectly. The betrayal was complete, not just Moretti's treachery, but the partnership's understanding that Dante's one weakness was his refusal to let innocents suffer. They'd found the crack in his armor and exploited it. What happens now? Moretti asked. You disappear. Tonight. I have people who will drive you to an apartment in Florida. You'll live there under supervision. Comfortable but contained. You'll have money, food, everything you need. But you'll never contact anyone from your old life again. Never speak to the partnership. Never come back north. You're not going to kill me? Killing you brings attention, creates questions, makes problems. You're going to vanish quietly. As far as anyone knows, you retired and moved south for your health. And if I refuse? Dante's expression didn't change. Then I let the partnership know you've been cooperating with federal investigators. They'll handle you their way. And their way won't be comfortable. Moretti nodded slowly, understanding. When do I leave? Now. There's a car waiting outside. Pack nothing. Bring nothing. Just go. Moretti walked toward the exit, stopped, turned back. For what it's worth, I never wanted this. They gave me no choice. Everyone has choices. You made yours. Now live with them. After Moretti left, Dante stood alone in the warehouse, processing. The partnership had been 3 steps ahead the entire time. They'd placed a mole years ago. They'd used Ellie as leverage to expose his methods. And now they knew his greatest vulnerability. He cared about her, genuinely cared. And the partnership would absolutely use that against him. Ellie was in danger. Real danger from an enemy she didn't know existed. An enemy Dante had brought to her doorstep by trying to help her. The weight of that realization settled over him like concrete. Everything he'd done to protect her had actually painted a target on her back. And now he had to figure out how to keep her safe from people who could reach her in ways he couldn't defend against. The war wasn't just about business anymore. It was personal. And the stakes had never been higher. Dante didn't sleep that night. He sat in his Providence apartment staring at his phone, trying to decide what to do about Ellie. The smart move was distance. Stop visiting the diner. Stop the conversations. Let whatever this was between them fade before the partnership used it against him. Protect her by walking away. But the partnership already knew. Moretti had told them everything. They'd watched Dante visit the diner repeatedly. They'd seen the pattern. They understood what she meant to him. Walking away wouldn't protect her now. It would just leave her vulnerable and unaware. He called the old mill at 6 a.m, asked to speak to the manager, explained he needed to rent the diner for a private event that evening after closing, offered enough money that questions weren't asked. Then he called Ellie. She answered on the 3rd ring, voice thick with sleep. Hello? It's Dante, the customer from the diner. I need to talk to you. Tonight. It's important. Silence. Then, how did you get my number? That's part of what I need to explain. Can you meet me at the old mill after your shift? Around midnight. The place will be closed. Just us. That sounds either really important or really creepy. It's important. And I understand if you don't trust me, but I need you to hear what I have to say. Another pause. Is this about you following me home? It's about why I was following you. About things you need to know to stay safe. Safe from what? That's what we need to talk about, please. Midnight. I promise you'll understand after. She agreed. Probably against her better judgment, but she agreed. The hours crawled by. Dante spent the day making arrangements with Sal. Security measures, contingency plans, ways to protect Ellie if things went wrong. By the time midnight approached, he had systems in place. Not perfect, but better than nothing. He arrived at the diner at 11:30. The manager let him in, locked the door behind him, and left through the back. Dante sat in his usual booth and waited. Ellie showed up at 5 past midnight. She knocked on the glass door. He let her in, locked it again behind her. She looked nervous, curious, maybe a little scared. This is weird. You know that, right? I know. Thank you for coming. They sat across from each other in the empty diner. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead. The silence felt heavy. There are people who want to hurt you. Dante said. No preamble. No easing into it. Because of me. Because I helped you and your father. Because they think you matter to me. Ellie stared at him. What are you talking about? The man who was hurting you. Vic DeLuca. He didn't work alone. He was part of something bigger. When I removed him, I disrupted their operation. Now they're looking for ways to get back at me. And they've identified you as someone I care about. You removed him? What does that mean? It means I made sure he couldn't hurt you anymore. I made sure your father's debt disappeared. I made sure you were safe. She leaned back. Processing. The anonymous fund. The letter. That was you. Yes. And Vic's arrest. That was you too. Yes. Her face cycled through emotions. Confusion. Shock. Something that might have been anger. Who are you? There it was. The question he couldn't fully answer without destroying everything. Someone who operates outside normal boundaries. Someone who has resources and connections that let me solve problems other people can't solve. Someone who noticed you were in trouble and couldn't walk away. That's not an answer. That's a political speech. Dante leaned forward. I run a business organization that exists in gray areas between legal and illegal. I'm not a good man by most standards. I've done things you wouldn't approve of. Hurt people who deserved it. Built an empire on leverage and control. But I have rules. And one of those rules is that innocent people don't get caught in the crossfire. When I saw what was happening to you, I had to intervene. You're a criminal. Yes. But you helped me. Yes. She stood up, paced to the window, stared out at the empty street. I should be running. I should be calling the police. I should be terrified right now. You should. But I'm not. Why am I not? I don't know. She turned back to face him. You've been protecting me this whole time, following me home, making sure I'm safe, spending your own money to help my father. Why? Why would someone like you care about someone like me? Dante stood, closed the distance between them. Because when I look at you, I see everything I've spent my life trying to protect. Someone good. Someone who works hard and doesn't complain and takes care of the people she loves. Someone who deserves better than what life gave her. And because somewhere in the last few months, I started caring about you in ways I have no right to. Ellie searched his face, looking for lies, for manipulation, for whatever angle he might be working. I'm 23 years old. I'm a waitress. I have nothing you could possibly want. You're wrong. You have everything I want. You just don't know it yet. This is insane. This whole situation is insane. I should leave. I should never talk to you again. You should. But these people you're talking about, they're dangerous? Very. And they might come after me. It's possible. So leaving doesn't actually make me safer? No, it doesn't. She stepped closer. Close enough that Dante could smell her shampoo. Some cheap drugstore brand that somehow smelled better than anything expensive. What do we do? She asked quietly. I keep you safe. However I have to. For as long as it takes. And what do I do? You trust me. Even though you shouldn't. Even though it's dangerous. Even though I'm asking you to take a leap that makes no logical sense. Ellie reached up, touched his face. Her hand was small and warm against his skin. I think I've been trusting you for a while now. I just didn't know what I was trusting you with. Dante caught her hand, held it. If you do this, if you let me into your life, there's no going back. You'll know things you can't unknow. You'll be connected to me in ways that could hurt you. I'm already connected to you. You made sure of that when you saved my father. Ellie. She kissed him, stood on her toes and pressed her lips to his and made the choice for both of them. It was soft at first, tentative, testing, then deeper, more certain, more real. Dante pulled her closer, wrapped his arms around her, and kissed her like she was oxygen, and he'd been drowning. All the control he'd maintained, all the distance he'd tried to keep, gone in that moment. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, she looked up at him with eyes that were clear and decided. I'm choosing this. I'm choosing you. Whatever that means. Whatever comes next. You don't know what you're choosing. Then show me. Teach me. Let me be part of whatever this is. Because walking away doesn't feel like an option anymore. Dante kissed her again. Slower this time. Understanding that everything had changed. That he'd crossed the final line between protecting a civilian and caring about someone who could destroy him. The partnership wanted war. They wanted to use her against him. They thought she was his weakness. They were right. She was. But she was also the first thing in 20 years worth fighting for beyond power and control. Whatever came next, They'd face it together. Dangerous, reckless, completely wrong by every logical measure, and absolutely inevitable. The next 72 hours moved like a military operation. Dante didn't waste time on sentiment or second thoughts. He'd made his choice. Now he had to live with the consequences. Sal assembled a team, not the usual muscle, tech specialists, security experts, people who understood digital warfare and information control. They swept Ellie's house for bugs. Found 3. Cameras disguised as smoke detectors, audio devices hidden in electrical outlets. The partnership had been watching her for weeks. Dante didn't tell her about the surveillance. Didn't want her to feel violated on top of everything else. Just had it removed quietly while she was at work. By Friday morning, he'd arranged new accommodations. A safe house in a suburb 30 minutes outside Providence. 3 bedrooms, secure perimeter, monitored access. The kind of place that looked normal from the outside but was designed to keep people safe from threats they couldn't see. Convincing Ellie to move was harder than dealing with the partnership. "You want me and my father to just leave our home?" She stood in his apartment, arms crossed. That stubborn look he was beginning to recognize, temporarily, until this situation is resolved. "What situation exactly? You still haven't told me everything. The less you know, the safer you are. That's garbage and you know it. If I'm already in danger, keeping me ignorant doesn't help anyone." She was right. Dante had spent his career controlling information. But this woman standing in front of him didn't respond well to being managed. There's an organization. Powerful people with resources that match or exceed mine. I disrupted their operation when I helped you. Now they want revenge. They'll use you to get to me if they can. So running and hiding is the answer? No. Fighting is the answer. But I need you somewhere I know you're protected while I fight. Carlo agreed more easily than his daughter. Maybe because he'd seen enough of life to know when not to argue. Maybe because he recognized the look in Dante's eyes. The look of a man who would burn the world down before letting harm come to someone he cared about. They moved on Saturday. Minimal belongings. Just clothes and essentials. Dante had the house furnished and supplied within hours. Carlo got the main bedroom on the ground floor for easy access. Ellie took the upstairs room with windows overlooking a quiet street. Security was invisible but present. Cameras. Monitors. People watching remotely 24 hours a day. If anyone approached that house who shouldn't be there, Dante would know within seconds. Meanwhile, Sal worked the offensive strategy. The partnership operated through legitimate channels. Government connections, corporate influence, digital manipulation. Fighting them required the same tools. Sal identified 3 members of the partnership's leadership, a former federal prosecutor now in private practice, a state senator with oversight on financial regulations, a tech executive whose company handled data security for half the banks in New England. All respectable, all clean on paper, all absolutely corrupt underneath. "We need leverage," Sal explained in Dante's office Sunday night. "Something that makes them back off without us having to expose ourselves further." "What kind of leverage?" "The same kind they use. Financial records, communication intercepts, evidence of crimes they've committed. We make it clear that if they come after us, we release everything. Mutually assured destruction. It's the only language they understand." But gathering that leverage took time, and the partnership wasn't waiting. Tuesday morning, the first wave hit. Documents appeared online, financial records from Continental Holdings, some real, some fabricated, all designed to make Dante's operation look like textbook money laundering. Anonymous tips flooded into the FBI. Journalists received packages with detailed accusations. Suddenly, federal investigators who'd never cared about Dante Bellomo were very interested in his business holdings. The attack was surgical, coordinated, designed to destroy his legitimate empire without ever confronting him directly. If they succeeded, everything he'd built would collapse. Bank accounts frozen, assets seized, associates arrested, the whole structure torn down by the same legal system he'd always stayed one step ahead of. Dante watched it happen with cold fury. This was what modern warfare looked like. No guns, no violence. Just information weaponized against him by people who understood the system better than he did. But something had changed in him. A month ago, this would have consumed him. The business was everything. The empire was his identity. Losing it would have meant losing himself. Now, sitting in the safe house watching Ellie teach her father how to use a tablet for his online physical therapy exercises, Dante understood that some things mattered more than power. He'd spent 20 years building an organization. creating stability, maintaining control, and in 3 months, a waitress with a bruised arm had shown him what he'd been missing. Connection, purpose beyond profit, someone to protect who wasn't part of the game. "You're quiet," Ellie said that evening. They were alone in the kitchen. Carlo had gone to bed early. "Thinking. About? About whether this is worth it, putting you in danger to fight people who might be stronger than me." She moved closer, took his hand. "You're not putting me in danger. They did that. You're trying to fix it. By making you hide. By disrupting your entire life. My entire life was working double shifts to pay off a debt that should never have existed. You gave me something better than that. You gave me hope. You gave me this." She gestured between them. "Whatever this is dangerous and complicated and probably going to end badly. Maybe, or maybe we're stronger than you think." He kissed her, pulled her close, tried to memorize the feeling of something good in a world that had been darkness for so long. Ellie's phone buzzed on the counter. She glanced at it, froze. "What is it?" She turned the screen toward him. A text message from an unknown number. No words, just a photo. Ellie walking into the safe house that morning. Time-stamped, location tagged, and below it, a second message that made Dante's blood run cold. "We know where she is. They know where she is." Let that sink in for a moment. Everything Dante did to protect her. Taking down Vic, erasing the debt, keeping his world separate from hers. It's all about to come crashing down. Now I have to ask you, do you think Dante can save her from the partnership? Do you think Ellie will survive what's coming? More importantly, do you think their love is worth the price they're about to pay? Drop your predictions in the comments. I promise I read them all, and some of you have theories that blow my mind. But here's the reality. If you don't like this video, if you don't share it, if you don't subscribe and turn on all notifications, part 2 of this story might never reach you. The algorithm is ruthless. It doesn't care about great stories. It only cares about engagement. We've spent weeks crafting this narrative, and all we're asking is that you help us share it with people who need to see it. Someone out there is scrolling right now, looking for exactly this kind of story, and they'll never find it unless you engage. Hit that like button. Share this with someone who loves crime dramas and forbidden romance. Subscribe so you're here when we drop part 2, because what happens next will leave you speechless. Comment below. Tell us what you think Dante should do. Should he risk everything for Ellie, or should he let her go to keep her safe? We read every single comment to make our stories better for you. Thank you for being here. Thank you for caring about these characters as much as we do. Now, we'll see you in part 2, if the algorithm lets us.